If adversities and hopeless grief have entirely taken away the taste for life, if the unfortunate man, strong of soul, more indignant about his fate than despondent or dejected, wishes for death, and yet preserves his life, without loving it, not from inclination or fear, but from duty, then his maxim has a moral content. To secure one's own happiness is one's duty, at least indirectly, for lack of contentment with one's condition, in the trouble of many worries and amidst unsatisfied needs, could easily become a great temptation to transgress one's duties. Duty is the necessity of an action from respect for the law. I ought never to proceed except in such a way that I could also will that my maxim should become a universal law. Everyone may make an untruthful promise when he finds himself in a predicament from which he can extricate himself in no other way. Innocence is a glorious thing, but then again it is very sad that it is so hard to preserve and so easily seduced. Everything in nature works according to laws. Only a rational being has the capacity to act according to the representation of laws, according to principles, or a will. Since reason is required for deriving actions from laws, the will is nothing other than practical reason. The categorical imperative would be the one that represented an action as objectively necessary by itself, without reference to another end. Now, if the action would be good merely as a means to something else, the imperative is hypothetical. If the action is represented as good in itself, hence as necessary in a will that in itself conforms to reason, as its principle, then it is categorical. The imperative that refers to the choice of means to one's own happiness, the prescription of prudence, is still hypothetical. The action is not commanded per se, but just as a means to another purpose. If I completely will the effect, I also will the action required for it. For to represent something as an effect possible by me in a certain way, and myself, with regard to it, as acting in this way, that is one and the same thing. There is therefore only a single categorical imperative, and it is this: act only according to that maxim through which you can at the same time will that it become a universal law. The universal imperative of duty could also be expressed as follows: so act as if the maxim of your action were to become by your will a universal law of nature. One must be able to will that a maxim of our action become a universal law. This is as such the canon of judging it morally. Now I say, a human being, and generally every rational being, exists as an end in itself, not merely as a means for the discretionary use for this or that will, but must in all its actions, whether directed towards itself or also to other rational beings, always be considered at the same time as an end. The practical imperative will thus be the following: so act that you use humanity, in your own person as well as in the person of any other, always at the same time as an end, never merely as a means. For all rational beings stand under the law, that each of them is to treat itself and all others, never merely as a means, but always at the same time as an end in itself. A rational being, however, belongs to the kingdom of ends as a member, if it is universally legislating in it, but also itself subject to these laws. It belongs to it as its head, if as legislating it is not subject to the will of another. Morality thus consists in referring all action to the legislation by which alone a kingdom of ends is possible. This legislation must, however, be found in every rational being itself, and be able to arise from its will, the principle of which is thus: to do no action on a maxim other than in such a way that it would be consistent with it that it be a universal law, and thus only in such a way that the will could through its maxim consider itself as at the same time universally legislating. A will is absolutely good that cannot be evil, hence whose maxim, if made a universal law, can never conflict with itself. This principle is therefore also its supreme law. Act always on the maxim, the universality of which, as a law, you can will at the same time. This is the only condition under which a will can never be in conflict with itself. And such an imperative is categorical.